Bear cub was stuck inside a snowplow racing. Toward a cliff, what this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning started like any other winter day in Pine Ridge Valley. Snow fell gently outside the cabin where Hazel Martinez sat feeding her 18-month-old daughter, Luna. The baby's chubby fingers wrapped around pieces of toast while she babbled happily in her high chair. "Mama, Mama," Luna giggled, throwing a piece of toast on the floor. Hazel smiled and picked it up. "You're such a messy little one, aren't you?" Outside, the rumble of heavy machinery echoed through the valley. The county snowplow was making its morning rounds, clearing the mountain roads before the next storm hit. Hazel barely noticed the sound. It was routine. Every winter morning, the same yellow beast would carve through the snow, keeping their isolated community connected to the outside world. But this morning was different. This morning, something was watching from the tree line. A small brown bear cub, no bigger than a house cat, had wandered away from its mother's den during the night. The cub was hungry and curious, drawn by strange scents carried on the wind. It had never seen humans before, never heard the roar of machines. Everything was new and fascinating. The cub stumbled through the deep snow, its tiny paws sinking with each step. It could smell something sweet, something that made its empty stomach growl. The scent was coming from near the big, rumbling thing that moved along the white path. Luna finished her breakfast and Hazel lifted her from the high chair. "Come on, baby, let's look out the window and see the snow." She carried Luna to the large picture window that faced the main road. The glass was cold against their faces as they watched the snowplow work its way up the mountain. The massive yellow machine pushed walls of snow to either side, its blade scraping against the asphalt with a harsh metallic sound. "Big truck?" Luna said, pointing with her tiny finger. "That's right, sweetie. The snow truck is cleaning our road." But as they watched, something caught Hazel's eye. A small dark shape was moving near the road, too close to the snowplow's path. At first, she thought it might be a dog that had gotten loose, but as the shape moved closer to the machine, she realized it was much smaller. "Oh my God," she whispered. The bear cub had found what it was looking for. Scattered along the roadside were the remains of someone's garbage that had blown from a truck earlier that week. Apple peels, bread crusts, and other scraps were frozen into the snow near the road's edge. The hungry cub began digging frantically, desperate for food. The snowplow driver, Marcus Webb, had been clearing these mountain roads for 15 years. He knew every curve, every dangerous spot, every place where the road came too close to the cliff's edge. But he had never encountered what was about to happen. Marcus adjusted his radio and took a sip of coffee from his thermos. The morning was going smoothly. He had 3 more miles to clear before he reached the dangerous section near Widow's Point, where the road curved sharply along a 200-foot drop. That part always made him nervous, especially in weather like this. He didn't see the small brown shape that was now directly in his path. The cub was so focused on the food buried in the snow that it didn't notice the approaching danger. The rumble of the engine was just background noise. The vibration through the ground felt like thunder, but the cub had never learned to fear such things. Back at the cabin, Hazel pressed her face against the window. Something was wrong. She could see the dark shape more clearly now, and her heart began to race. "Luna, stay right here," she said, setting the baby down on the couch. "Mama will be right back." She grabbed her coat and rushed outside into the cold air. The snow was falling harder now, and the wind bit at her face. She could barely make out the snowplow in the distance, but she could hear it getting closer. "Hey!" she shouted, but her voice was lost in the wind and the noise of the machine. She was too far away, and the driver couldn't hear her. The cub found a piece of frozen bread and began gnawing on it eagerly. Finally, food. Its mother had been gone for too long, and the cub's stomach had been empty for days. It was so hungry that it didn't notice when the ground began to shake more violently. Marcus saw the curve ahead and began to slow down slightly. This was the tricky part of his route. The road here was narrow, with the mountain rising steeply on one side and dropping off into nothing on the other. He had to be careful with his blade angle to avoid pushing snow over the edge while still clearing the road effectively. He adjusted his mirrors and focused on the path ahead. The snow was coming down heavier now, making visibility poor. He turned on his flashing lights and reduced his speed even more. That's when he heard something that made his blood run cold. A sharp, high-pitched cry cut through the noise of his engine. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make him slam on his brakes. The massive snowplow lurched to a stop, throwing snow in all directions. Marcus looked around frantically. What was that sound? It almost sounded like... He jumped out of the cab and ran to the front of his plow. What he saw made his hands shake. Wedged between his blade and the frame of the plow was a tiny bear cub. The animal was alive but trapped, its small body caught in the machinery. Its eyes were wide with terror, and it was making soft whimpering sounds. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed. "How did you get in there, little guy?" The cub must have been eating something right in the plow's path when Marcus hit it. The blade had scooped it up along with the snow, and now it was stuck. Marcus could see that the cub wasn't seriously injured, but it was trapped tight. Any attempt to move the plow forward or backward could crush the tiny animal, and they were less than 50 yards from the cliff's edge. Back at the cabin, Luna had climbed down from the couch and toddled over to the window. She pressed her small hands against the glass and looked out at the world of white. The snowplow had stopped, and she could see a man walking around it. "Mama," she called, but there was no answer. Hazel was still outside, struggling through the deep snow to get closer to the road. Luna had always been drawn to animals. Even at 18 months old, she seemed to have a special connection with them. Birds would land near her when she played outside. The neighbor's cat would come running when it heard her voice. And now, looking out at the stopped snowplow, she sensed something was wrong. She began to cry. Not the angry cry of a hungry baby or the frustrated cry of a tired toddler. This was different. This was a cry of distress, as if she could somehow sense the fear and panic happening on the road below. Marcus knelt in the snow next to his plow, trying to figure out how to free the trapped cub without hurting it. The animal was wedged in tight, and every time Marcus tried to reach for it, the cub would panic and struggle, making the situation worse. "Easy, little one," he said softly. "I'm trying to help you." But the cub didn't understand. All it knew was that it was trapped, surrounded by cold metal and unable to move. Its mother was nowhere to be found, and this strange giant creature was making loud noises and reaching for it with huge hands. The cub's struggles were getting weaker. The stress and cold were taking their toll on its small body. Marcus realized he needed to act fast, but he also knew that one wrong move could be fatal for the tiny animal. He tried to back the plow away from the cub, but the animal was wedged too tightly. He tried to lift the blade, but the hydraulics wouldn't give him the precise control he needed. Every adjustment he made seemed to make things worse. And all the while, the cliff's edge waited just yards away. Luna's cries grew louder. Something inside her, some instinct she couldn't name or understand, was telling her that something precious was in danger. She looked around the empty cabin, her mother nowhere to be seen, and made a decision that would change everything. The baby gate at the top of the stairs was latched but not locked. Luna had watched her mother open it countless times, and her curious little fingers had tested it often. Now, driven by something deeper than toddler curiosity, she managed to work the latch free. The gate swung open. Hazel was still struggling through the snow, calling out to the snowplow driver, when she heard her daughter's cries coming from behind her. She turned around to see Luna standing at the open front door of the cabin, still in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face. "Luna, no, go back inside." But the baby took a step forward into the snow, then another. Her bare feet sank into the cold white powder, but she didn't stop. She was walking toward the road, toward the stopped snowplow, toward something she couldn't see but somehow knew needed her help. Marcus was getting desperate. The cub was growing weaker, and he could see its breathing becoming more labored. The cold was affecting the tiny animal badly, and shock was setting in. He needed to get it free and warm, fast. He tried once more to adjust the plow's position, but as he did, he heard something that stopped him cold. Over the wind and the noise of his idling engine, he could hear a child crying. He looked up from his work and saw an incredible sight. A tiny figure in pink pajamas was walking through the snow toward him. Behind the child, a woman was running and shouting, but the baby wasn't stopping. "What the hell?" Marcus stood up, completely confused. "Lady, get your kid out of here. This isn't safe." But Luna wasn't listening to the adult voices. She was following something else entirely. The same instinct that had told her something was wrong was now guiding her forward. She could hear something crying, something small and afraid, and every step brought her closer to it. The cub heard the baby's voice and lifted its head slightly. Through its fear and exhaustion, it sensed something different about this new sound. Not the deep, threatening tones of the adult humans, but something higher, softer, something that reminded it somehow of home. Luna reached the snowplow and stood on her tiptoes, trying to see what was making the sad sounds she could hear. Marcus, still kneeling by the plow blade, looked at her in amazement. "You shouldn't be here, sweetheart," he said gently. "It's dangerous." But Luna ignored him. She had spotted the cub wedged in the machinery, and her eyes grew wide. She had never seen a bear before, but to her 18-month-old mind it looked like the biggest, fluffiest puppy in the world. "Puppy," she said clearly. "Puppy hurt." And then, before Marcus could stop her, she reached out her tiny hand toward the trapped cub. The moment Luna's fingers touched the cub's matted fur, something extraordinary happened. The terrified animal, which had been struggling and whimpering in panic, suddenly went completely still. Its dark eyes locked onto Luna's face, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause around them. Marcus watched in disbelief as the cub stopped fighting against its metal prison. The baby and the wild animal stared at each other, and he could swear he saw something pass between them. Some kind of understanding that went beyond words or species. "Well, I'll be damned," Marcus whispered. Luna began to make soft cooing sounds, the same gentle noises she made when her mother tucked her into bed at night. She stroked the cub's head with her small hand, and the animal's breathing began to slow and steady. The panic in its eyes faded, replaced by something that looked almost like trust. Hazel finally reached them, her lungs burning from running through the deep snow. She was about to scold Luna for wandering off when she saw what was happening. Her daughter was somehow calming a wild bear cub with nothing but her touch and her voice. "Oh my God," Hazel breathed, her anger instantly forgotten. "Luna, honey, be very careful." But Luna seemed to know exactly what she was doing. She continued making her soft sounds while gently petting the cub's fur. The animal had completely relaxed now, no longer struggling against the metal that held it captive. Marcus seized the opportunity. With the cub no longer fighting, he could work more carefully to free it. He reached for his toolbox in the cab, but as he turned away, he heard Hazel gasp. "Marcus, look." He turned back to see something that would haunt his dreams for years to come. About 30 yards away, emerging from the tree line, was an adult black bear, and she was walking straight toward them. The mother bear had been foraging deeper in the forest when she heard her cub's distress calls. Now she was coming to investigate, and she looked anything but friendly. Her massive head swayed back and forth as she approached, and Marcus could see the powerful muscles beneath her thick black coat. "We need to get out of here," Marcus said quietly. "Right now." But Luna didn't move. She was still focused entirely on the trapped cub, oblivious to the approaching danger. The baby continued her gentle petting and soft sounds, completely unaware that a 300-pound predator was closing in on them. Hazel's maternal instincts kicked into overdrive. Every fiber in her body screamed at her to grab Luna and run, but she knew they couldn't outrun a full-grown bear, especially not in the deep snow. And they couldn't leave the cub trapped either. The mother bear would never let them get close enough to free her baby if they backed away now. "Marcus," Hazel whispered urgently, "can you get the cub out quickly?" "I'm trying," he replied, his hands shaking as he worked with his tools. "But if I move too fast, I might hurt it." The mother bear was 20 yards away now, and Marcus could hear her breathing. She had stopped walking and was studying the scene in front of her. Her cub was trapped in human machinery, and there were humans touching her baby. Every instinct told her to charge, to attack, to defend her offspring at any cost, but something was holding her back. Luna's voice reached the mother bear's ears, and the sound was unlike anything the animal had ever heard from humans before. It wasn't the harsh shouting or mechanical noises she associated with their kind. This was something softer, gentler, something that reminded her of the sounds mother animals made to comfort their young. The mother bear took another step forward, but slowly this time. She was still ready to attack if necessary, but curiosity was beginning to override her aggression. Why wasn't her cub crying? Why did it seem so calm, despite being trapped? Luna looked up from the cub and saw the massive bear approaching. Any other child would have screamed in terror, but Luna's reaction was completely different. She smiled and waved her free hand at the mother bear, the same way she waved at neighbors when they walked past the cabin. "Mama bear," Luna said clearly, as if she were greeting an old friend. The mother bear stopped dead in her tracks. This tiny human creature was showing no fear, no aggression. Instead, it was making the same gentle sounds to her cub that she herself would make. The human child was comforting her baby. Marcus finally managed to work one of his pry bars into the right position. With careful, precise movements, he began to bend the metal that was holding the cub prisoner. The animal felt the pressure around its body beginning to ease, but it didn't struggle. Luna's continued petting and soft sounds kept it calm and still. "Almost got it," Marcus whispered. "Just a little more." Hazel watched the mother bear, ready to throw herself between the animal and her daughter if necessary. But the bear wasn't showing signs of aggression anymore. Instead, she seemed to be waiting, watching with intelligent eyes as the humans worked to free her cub. The metal gave way with a soft grinding sound, and suddenly the cub was free. It tumbled out of the machinery and into the snow, shaking but unharmed. For a moment it lay there stunned, unable to believe it was no longer trapped. Luna clapped her hands together in delight. "Puppy free, puppy okay." The cub struggled to its feet and looked around. It saw its mother watching from nearby and let out a small, happy chirping sound. But instead of running immediately to her, it did something that amazed everyone present. The cub turned back to Luna and nuzzled against her hand, as if saying thank you. Luna giggled and gently scratched behind the cub's ears. The bond that had formed between them in those terrifying moments was unlike anything the adults had ever witnessed. It was as if the baby and the bear cub recognized something in each other, some shared innocence that transcended the boundaries between species. The mother bear watched this interaction and made a decision that went against every survival instinct she possessed. Instead of calling her cub to her immediately, she began to approach the group slowly, her massive paws making soft crunching sounds in the snow. Marcus reached for his radio to call for backup, but Hazel put a hand on his arm to stop him. "Wait," she whispered. "I don't think she wants to hurt us." The mother bear came within 10 feet of them and sat down in the snow. Her dark eyes moved between Luna and her cub, and Marcus could swear he saw something like gratitude in her expression. She was thanking them, in her own way, for saving her baby. Luna looked up at the massive bear and held out her hand, the same gesture she had used to comfort the cub. "Nice mama bear," she said softly. What happened next would be talked about in Pine Ridge Valley for generations to come. The mother bear extended her enormous paw and gently touched Luna's tiny hand with one massive claw. The contact lasted only a second, but it was a moment of connection between two mothers, two species, two different worlds. Then the mother bear made a soft chuffing sound to her cub. The little one reluctantly left Luna's side and trotted over to its mother. The adult bear stood up, nuzzled her baby to make sure it was truly unharmed, then looked back at the humans one more time. She gave what could only be described as a nod of acknowledgement before turning and walking back toward the forest, her cub following close behind. The 3 humans stood in the snow, watching until the bears disappeared into the trees. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the gentle whisper of falling snow. "Did that really just happen?" Marcus finally asked. Hazel picked up Luna, who was starting to shiver in her pajamas. "I think it did," she said, still not quite believing it herself. But as they prepared to leave, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold all over again. In their focus on the trapped cub and the approaching mother bear, they had all forgotten about their location. The snowplow had stopped less than 15 feet from the edge of Widow's Point Cliff. If the cub hadn't been trapped, if Luna hadn't appeared to calm it, if Marcus had continued forward even a few more seconds while trying to clear his blade, the massive machine would have gone right over the edge. The 200-foot drop would have been fatal. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, looking at the cliff's edge. "We were almost—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The realization of how close they had all come to disaster was overwhelming. If Luna hadn't somehow known that the cub was in trouble, if she hadn't left the safety of the cabin to help, they would all be dead at the bottom of the ravine right now. Hazel followed his gaze and felt her knees go weak. The enormity of what had almost happened hit her like a physical blow. Her baby daughter had saved not just the bear cub, but all of them. Luna, oblivious to the adult concerns around her, was looking back toward the forest where the bears had disappeared. She waved her little hand in that direction and called out, "Bye-bye, puppy. Bye-bye, Mama Bear." And from somewhere in the trees, as if in response, came a soft chuffing sound that might have been an answer. As they walked back toward the cabin, none of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge above. Dr. Sarah Chen, a wildlife biologist from the State University, had been tracking the mother bear and her cub for weeks as part of her research project. She had followed them down from the higher elevations, trying to document their behavior as they searched for food in the lower valleys. She had witnessed the entire encounter through her binoculars, and what she had seen defied everything she thought she knew about bear behavior. Adult, female black bears with cubs were notoriously aggressive toward humans. They would attack anything they perceived as a threat to their offspring. often with fatal results. But this bear had not only refrained from attacking, she had actually shown what appeared to be gratitude toward the humans who had freed her cub, and the way she had responded to the human child was unlike anything documented in scientific literature. Dr. Chen made detailed notes in her field journal, but she knew that no one would believe her report without video evidence. Unfortunately, the encounter had happened too quickly for her to get her camera ready. She would have to rely on the testimonies of the people involved, and she doubted anyone would take the story seriously. But as she packed up her equipment and prepared to head back to her research station, Dr. Chen made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. She was going to stay in Pine Ridge Valley for a while longer. Something extraordinary was happening here, and she intended to find out what it was. Back at the cabin, Hazel got Luna into dry clothes and wrapped her in warm blankets. The baby seemed none the worse for her adventure, but Hazel couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. How had Luna known the cub was in trouble? How had she managed to calm a wild animal so completely? "Mama," Luna said, pointing toward the window. "Puppy come back." Hazel looked out at the forest and wondered the same thing. Would they see the bears again? And if they did, what would happen next? Marcus finished moving his snowplow to a safe distance from the cliff and radioed his supervisor to report the incident. He tried to keep his account factual and professional, but even he could hear how unbelievable it sounded. "You're telling me a baby calmed down a wild bear cub?" his supervisor asked over the radio. "That's exactly what I'm telling you, Joe. I saw it with my own eyes." There was a long pause before his supervisor responded. "Well, I guess stranger things have happened. Just be more careful out there, Marcus, and maybe keep an eye out for more wildlife." As Marcus signed off, he looked back toward the forest where the bears had disappeared. He had been working these mountain roads for 15 years, and he thought he had seen everything. But today had shown him that the world was full of mysteries he couldn't begin to understand. What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The connection that had formed between Luna and the bear cub would have consequences that none of them could have predicted. And the mother bear, despite her natural instincts to avoid humans, found herself drawn back toward the valley where the small human child lived. She couldn't explain the feeling, but something told her that their paths would cross again. In her den that night, the mother bear cleaned her cub thoroughly, checking for any injuries from its ordeal. The little one seemed completely unharmed, but it kept making soft sounds and looking toward the direction of the human settlement. The cub had been changed by its encounter with Luna, just as she had been changed by touching it. A bond had formed between them that transcended the natural order, and neither the human child nor the bear cub would ever be quite the same again. As Luna drifted off to sleep that night, she dreamed of soft brown fur and gentle dark eyes. In her dreams, she was playing in a meadow full of flowers, and her new friend was there with her, rolling in the grass and chasing butterflies. And in a den deep in the forest, a bear cub dreamed of tiny hands and a voice like music, and wondered when it would hear that voice again. 3 days passed quietly in Pine Ridge Valley. Hazel had tried to return to their normal routine, but everything felt different now. Luna kept going to the window and looking toward the forest, as if she was waiting for something. She would point outside and say, "Puppy," over and over, and Hazel's heart would ache because she didn't know how to explain that wild animals didn't come back like pets. But on the 4th morning, something changed. Hazel was making breakfast when she heard Luna making excited sounds from the living room. She rushed over to find her daughter pressed against the window, clapping her hands and bouncing on her toes. "Puppy, puppy back!" Luna shouted with pure joy. Hazel looked outside and felt her heart skip a beat. There, at the edge of their property where the yard met the forest, sat the bear cub. It was just sitting there in the snow, looking directly at their cabin as if it was waiting for something. "Oh my God," Hazel whispered. This can't be happening. But it was happening. The cub had somehow found its way back to them, and it showed no signs of leaving. Even more concerning, Hazel couldn't see any sign of the mother bear. Where was she? Had something happened to her? Or was she somewhere nearby, watching and waiting? Luna ran to the door and began pulling at the handle. "Go see Puppy! Go see!" "No, Luna," Hazel said firmly, pulling her daughter away from the door. "We can't go outside, it's not safe." But even as she said it, Hazel felt torn. The cub looked so small and alone sitting there in the snow. What if it was hungry? What if it needed help? The memory of how gentle it had been with Luna 3 days ago made it hard to see it as a threat. She called Marcus Webb, the snowplow driver, to ask for advice. He listened to her description of the situation and let out a long whistle. "That's one determined little bear," he said. "But Mrs. Martinez, you can't let your daughter go out there. Even if the cub seems friendly, its mother could be anywhere. And mother bears don't give second chances." Hazel knew he was right, but Luna was getting more upset by the minute. The baby kept crying and pointing at the window, clearly distressed that she couldn't reach her friend. It was breaking Hazel's heart to see her daughter so sad. That's when she remembered the wildlife biologist Marcus had mentioned. Dr. Sarah Chen had left her contact information with the local ranger station after witnessing the encounter 3 days ago. Maybe she would know what to do. Dr. Chen answered her phone on the second ring, and she sounded excited when Hazel explained the situation. "The cub came back. That's extraordinary," Dr. Chen said. "I'm about 20 minutes away from your location. Don't do anything until I get there. And whatever you do, don't let your daughter outside." While they waited for Dr. Chen to arrive, Hazel kept watch at the window. The cub hadn't moved from its spot at the edge of the yard. It just sat there patiently, occasionally looking toward the cabin and making soft chirping sounds. Luna had calmed down somewhat, but she kept asking when she could go play with the puppy. Hazel tried to distract her with toys and snacks, but nothing held her attention for long. The baby's focus kept returning to the window and the small brown shape outside. Dr. Chen arrived in a battered Jeep loaded with scientific equipment. She was a small, energetic woman in her 30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She immediately began setting up camera equipment to document whatever was about to happen. "This is unprecedented," she told Hazel as she adjusted her telephoto lens. "Wild bear cubs don't seek out human contact. They're taught from birth to avoid us. The fact that this one came back suggests something extraordinary happened between it and your daughter." "But where's its mother?" Hazel asked, scanning the tree line nervously. "Good question. She could be nearby, letting the cub explore on its own. Or ... Dr. Chen paused, looking troubled. Or something might have happened to her. Before Hazel could ask what she meant, Luna let out an excited squeal from the living room. They rushed over to see what had caught her attention, and both women gasped at what they saw. The cub was no longer alone. A second bear had emerged from the forest, but this one was different. It was smaller than the mother bear they had seen before, with lighter brown fur and a more slender build. As it approached the cub, Dr. Chen realized what they were looking at. "That's the father," she said in amazement. "Male bears almost never interact with their cubs. They usually avoid them completely, but this one is actually approaching." The adult male bear reached the cub and began sniffing it carefully, as if checking to make sure it was unharmed. Whales, dolphins, and seals began appearing in unusual numbers along both coasts. They didn't beach themselves or show distress. Instead, they performed synchronized swimming displays visible from shore, their movements so coordinated and graceful that even hardened military officials found themselves moved to tears. Land mammals followed suit. In every major city around the world, urban wildlife began displaying unprecedented behavior. Pigeons arranged themselves into perfect geometric patterns on government buildings. Stray cats and dogs gathered peacefully in public squares, sitting quietly together despite their natural antagonisms. Even rats and mice emerged from hiding to participate in the strange, beautiful demonstrations. But it was the zoo animals that delivered the most powerful message. In every zoo, aquarium, and wildlife preserve on Earth, the animals began refusing to eat, not starving themselves, but politely declining food until their human caretakers agreed to post signs explaining Luna's story and the peaceful message she represented. Within days, zoos worldwide had become inadvertent centers of education about the little girl who could speak to animals. The global response was immediate and overwhelming. The grizzly stood frozen, completely confused by this unprecedented situation. Its hunting instincts told it to attack, but something deeper, some ancient memory of gentleness and care, was holding it back. Dr. Chen was frantically trying to get a clear shot with the tranquilizer gun she kept in her jeep, but Luna was too close to the grizzly. Any dart that missed could hit the baby, and the drugs designed for a 600-pound bear would kill a human child instantly. Hazel was running toward the scene, her maternal instincts overriding every survival reflex she possessed. She was going to save her daughter or die trying. But then something happened that no one could have predicted. The father black bear, instead of fleeing from the grizzly as every survival instinct dictated, slowly approached Luna and his cub. He positioned himself between the grizzly and the two young ones, but he wasn't showing aggression. Instead, he was making the same soft, gentle sounds that Luna was making. The grizzly looked between the black bear and the human child, its confusion growing by the second. These weren't the behaviors it expected from either species. The black bear should be running. The human should be screaming. But instead, they were both showing the same strange gentleness toward the cub. Luna looked up at the massive grizzly bear and smiled. Even surrounded by danger, even facing a predator that could kill her with one swipe of its paw, she showed no fear. She held out one tiny hand toward the grizzly, the same gesture she had used with the mother bear 3 days ago. "Nice bear," she said softly. "Nice big bear." The grizzly stared at her outstretched hand. No human had ever offered it anything but fear and violence. This child was offering something else entirely, something the bear couldn't name but somehow recognized. Slowly, incredibly, the massive grizzly lowered its head and gently touched Luna's hand with its nose. The contact lasted only a moment, but it was enough. The grizzly had made its choice. It turned away from the cub and began walking back toward the forest, its hunting instincts completely overridden by something it couldn't understand but couldn't ignore. As the grizzly disappeared into the trees, the father black bear gently nuzzled Luna's shoulder, as if thanking her for saving his cub's life. Then he called to his offspring, and the two black bears also headed back to the forest. But before they disappeared, the cub broke away from its father one last time and ran back to Luna. It gently licked her face, covering her with warm bear kisses, before finally following its father into the safety of the trees. Dr. Chen stood in the snow with her camera hanging forgotten around her neck, trying to process what she had just witnessed. In 15 years of studying bear behavior, she had never seen anything remotely like this. A human child had not only survived an encounter with a hunting grizzly, she had somehow communicated with it on a level that transcended species. Hazel reached Luna and scooped her up, checking frantically for injuries. But the baby was completely unharmed, giggling and waving at the spot where the bears had disappeared. "Bye-bye, bears," Luna called happily. "Come back soon." As they walked back to the cabin, none of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge above. Sheriff Tom Bradley had received reports of unusual bear activity in the area and had come to investigate. Through his binoculars, he had witnessed the entire encounter, and what he had seen would haunt him for the rest of his life. A baby had just done the impossible. She had stopped a grizzly bear attack with nothing but gentleness and courage, and according to his radio chatter, similar reports were starting to come in from all over the valley. Something was happening in Pine Ridge Valley, something that defied explanation. And at the center of it all was an 18-month-old child who seemed to speak a language that every animal could understand. Sheriff Bradley made a decision that would have consequences none of them could foresee. He was going to keep this incident quiet for now, but he was also going to start keeping a very close eye on the Martinez family. Because if word got out about what Luna could do, people would come. Scientists, reporters, government officials, and others who might not have the child's best interests at heart. And Sheriff Bradley had a feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger and more mysterious than any of them could imagine. Back in the cabin, as Hazel changed Luna into dry clothes, she noticed something that made her heart stop. On her daughter's small hand, where the grizzly had touched it, was a small mark. Not an injury or a bruise, but something else entirely. It looked like a paw print, pressed gently into her skin. And as Hazel watched, the mark began to glow with a soft, warm light that pulsed in rhythm with Luna's heartbeat. The mark faded after a few seconds, leaving no trace behind. But Hazel knew what she had seen, and the implications terrified her. Something had happened to her daughter during that encounter with the grizzly, something that went beyond mere animal communication. Luna had been changed in some fundamental way, marked by forces that Hazel couldn't begin to understand. And deep in the forest, 3 bears were experiencing their own strange changes. The cub found that it could sense Luna's presence even from miles away, as if an invisible thread connected them. The father bear discovered that his usual fear of humans had been replaced by something else, a protective instinct that extended beyond his own species. And the grizzly, as it returned to its den high in the mountains, carried with it a memory of gentleness that would alter its behavior for the rest of its life. Never again would it hunt bear cubs. Never again would it see humans as mere threats to be avoided. The encounter had changed them all, linking them together in ways that science couldn't explain and that none of them fully understood. But this was only the beginning. Word of the strange events in Pine Ridge Valley was already spreading, carried by radio chatter and whispered conversations. And there were others who had been watching and waiting. Others who understood exactly what Luna's abilities meant. They were coming, and when they arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. 2 weeks had passed since the grizzly encounter, and life in Pine Ridge Valley had taken on an eerie quality that no one could quite explain. Animals that had never been seen in the lower elevations were beginning to appear near the town. Deer would graze peacefully in people's yards, showing no fear when humans approached. A family of foxes had taken up residence under the post office, and the local cats had formed an unlikely friendship with them. But most strange of all were the reports coming in about Luna Martinez. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store swore that when Luna had visited with her mother, every bird in the parking lot had landed near the baby's stroller, singing in perfect harmony. The mailman, Pete Kowalski, claimed that when he delivered packages to the Martinez cabin, a whole parade of forest animals would follow him down the driveway, as if they were hoping to catch a glimpse of the little girl. Dr. Sarah Chen had been documenting everything, filling notebook after notebook with observations that challenged everything she thought she knew about animal behavior. Her academic colleagues were already questioning her credibility based on her preliminary reports. But she knew what she had witnessed was real. What troubled her most were the calls she had been receiving from government agencies. First, It was the Fish and Wildlife Service, asking routine questions about her bear research. Then came the Department of Agriculture, inquiring about possible disease vectors in the local wildlife population. Yesterday, she had received a call from someone claiming to represent the Centers for Disease Control, asking very specific questions about unusual human-animal interactions in the valley. Dr. Chen wasn't naive. She knew that word was getting out, despite Sheriff Bradley's efforts to keep things quiet, and she had a growing suspicion that some very powerful people were taking an interest in Luna Martinez. That morning, she decided to warn Hazel directly. "I think we need to talk," Dr. Chen said when Hazel answered the phone. "Not over the phone. Can I come over?" Hazel heard the urgency in the scientist's voice and immediately agreed. She had been having her own concerns about the attention Luna was attracting. Yesterday, a man in an expensive suit had stopped by, claiming to be a journalist writing about wildlife in rural communities. He had asked very specific questions about Luna's interaction with the bears, questions that suggested he already knew far more than he should have. When Dr. Chen arrived at the cabin, she brought disturbing news. "Hazel, I think Luna might be in danger," she said without preamble. "I've been getting calls from government agencies and they're asking the wrong kinds of questions. The kind of questions that suggest they want to study Luna rather than protect her." Before Hazel could respond, Luna appeared from the kitchen, toddling over to Dr. Chen with a big smile. "Sarah," she said clearly, using the scientist's name for the first time. Dr. Chen knelt down to Luna's level and was immediately struck by something different about the child. Luna's eyes seemed brighter somehow, more aware than they had been 2 weeks ago. And when the baby smiled at her, Dr. Chen felt a strange sense of peace wash over her, as if all her worries had suddenly become manageable. "Hazel," Dr. Chen said slowly, "has Luna been developing faster than normal lately?" Hazel nodded, looking troubled. "Her vocabulary has exploded in the past 2 weeks. She's saying words I've never taught her, and she seems to understand everything we say to her, even complex sentences. Yesterday, she pointed to a picture of a wolf in one of her books and said, 'cousin.' When I asked her what she meant, she said, 'cousin to puppy,' and pointed toward the forest." Dr. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. Luna was somehow developing an understanding of animal relationships that even she, with her PhD in wildlife biology, found impressive. "There's something else," Hazel continued. "She's been having dreams. She talks in her sleep, and it's not baby babble anymore. She's having conversations with someone or something. Last night I heard her saying, 'Don't be scared, Mama Bear, Luna help.' She was comforting someone in her dream." Before Dr. Chen could respond to this unsettling information, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching the cabin. Multiple vehicles from the sound of it. Hazel looked out the window and felt her blood run cold. 3 black SUVs were making their way up the winding driveway to the cabin. They moved with military precision, and she could see figures in dark suits inside. "Oh, God," Dr. Chen whispered, "they're here." The vehicles stopped in front of the cabin, and 6 people emerged. They were all dressed identically in black suits and dark sunglasses, despite the overcast winter day. The lead figure, a tall woman with silver hair, approached the front door with confident strides. Hazel scooped up Luna and held her protectively as the woman knocked on the door. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Agent Rebecca Walsh with the Department of Biological Defense. We need to speak with you about your daughter." "Department of what?" Hazel called through the door. "I've never heard of that agency." "We're a specialized unit that deals with unusual biological phenomena," Agent Walsh replied. "Your daughter has displayed abilities that fall under our jurisdiction." We need to conduct some tests to ensure she doesn't pose a threat to national security. Dr. Chen grabbed Hazel's arm. Don't open that door, she whispered urgently. There's no such thing as a Department of Biological Defense. These people are lying about who they are. Luna, who had been quiet up until now, suddenly pointed toward the window. Friends coming, she said clearly. Hazel looked outside and gasped. Emerging from the forest came the most incredible sight she had ever witnessed. Animals of every description were approaching the cabin. The bear family they had encountered before was leading the procession, but they were followed by deer, foxes, rabbits, squirrels, and even a majestic elk with a massive rack of antlers. They weren't running or showing any signs of panic. Instead, they moved with purpose, as if they were answering a call that only they could hear. Agent Walsh saw the approaching animals and spoke rapidly into a radio device. Control, we have a situation. The subject appears to be attracting significant wildlife. Request immediate backup and tranquilizer support. The response came back in a cold, mechanical voice. Confirmed. Air support is en route. Secure the subject at all costs. Dr. Chen felt sick. These people weren't here to study Luna. They were here to take her. Hazel, we need to get out of here right now, she said urgently. Take Luna and go out the back door. My Jeep is parked behind the cabin. But even as she spoke, they could hear the sound of helicopter blades approaching. Through the window, Hazel could see a military helicopter circling overhead, and she realized they were surrounded. Luna seemed completely calm despite the chaos developing around her. She looked up at her mother with eyes that seemed far too wise for an 18-month-old child. Mama no scared, she said softly. Luna protectee. The little girl walked to the front window and placed her tiny hand against the glass. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. Every animal that had gathered outside the cabin suddenly stopped moving and turned to face the black SUVs. The bears rose up on their hind legs. The elk lowered its antlers threateningly. Even the smallest rabbits and squirrels positioned themselves between the cabin and the government agents. Agent Walsh spoke into her radio again, but her voice now carried a note of uncertainty. Control, the wildlife appears to be defending the target. How do you want us to proceed? The response was immediate and chilling. Tranquilize everything. Animals, civilians, the target. We'll sort it out later. Dr. Chen heard this exchange through the thin cabin walls and made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She wasn't going to let them take Luna. Hazel, listen to me carefully, she said, grabbing the other woman's shoulders. There's something you need to know about your daughter. What she can do, it's not natural, it's not normal human ability, but it's also not dangerous, at least not in the way these people think. What are you talking about? Hazel demanded. I think Luna is what some indigenous cultures call a bridge walker, Dr. Chen explained rapidly. Someone who can communicate directly with the natural world. It's been theoretical until now, but your daughter is living proof that such people exist. Before Hazel could ask more questions, they heard tranquilizer guns being fired outside. But instead of the animals collapsing, something else happened that defied all logic. The tranquilizer darts bounced harmlessly off the animals, as if they were protected by an invisible barrier. Agent Walsh could be heard shouting orders, but her voice was getting more panicked by the minute. Luna walked calmly to the front door and somehow managed to unlock it and pull it open. Hazel tried to stop her, but the little girl was surprisingly strong for her size. Luna talked to bad people, she announced, and stepped outside before anyone could react. The scene that greeted her was like something from a surreal dream. Dozens of wild animals had formed a protective circle around the cabin, facing outward toward the government agents. The helicopter was still circling overhead, but its occupants seemed hesitant to act with so many animals in the area. Agent Walsh saw Luna emerge from the cabin and immediately drew what looked like a modified tranquilizer gun. "There's the target," she called to her team. "Take the shot." But as she raised the weapon, the massive grizzly bear that Luna had calmed weeks earlier emerged from behind the other animals. It was even larger than before, its silver-tipped fur gleaming in the winter light. The bear looked directly at Agent Walsh and let out a roar that shook the ground. The agent's hands began to tremble, and she found herself unable to pull the trigger. There was something in the bear's eyes, an intelligence and warning that went far beyond normal animal behavior. Luna walked fearlessly among the gathered animals, petting and speaking softly to each one. As she did, more animals continued to emerge from the forest. Hawks and eagles circled overhead. A pack of wolves appeared at the tree line, their alpha stepping forward to nuzzle Luna's hand. "Impossible," Agent Walsh whispered. "How many species are we dealing with here?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Sheriff Tom Bradley's patrol car came roaring up the driveway, followed by 3 more vehicles filled with local residents. The sheriff jumped out of his car with his service weapon drawn, but he wasn't pointing it at the animals. He was pointing it at Agent Walsh. "I don't know who you people are," Sheriff Bradley announced loudly, "but you're trespassing on private property and threatening a child. You have 10 seconds to get back in your vehicles and leave my jurisdiction." Agent Walsh turned to face this new threat, and her expression was one of pure frustration. "Sheriff, you don't understand what you're dealing with. This child represents a potential biological weapon. We have authorization to—" "You have authorization to get the hell out of my county," Sheriff Bradley interrupted. "I've been watching this situation develop for weeks, and the only threat I see here is you." The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but Luna decided to end it herself. She walked directly up to Agent Walsh, who still had her tranquilizer gun raised, and looked up at her with those impossibly wise eyes. "Lady scared," Luna said softly. "Luna not hurt lady. Luna help animals be happy. Animals not hurt people unless people hurt animals first." The simplicity and innocence of the statement hit Agent Walsh like a physical blow. She found herself looking down into the face of a child who showed no fear, no anger, only a desire to help and protect. For the first time in her career, she began to question whether her orders were justified. "Control," she said into her radio, requesting permission to abort mission. The response was immediate and harsh. "Negative. Secure the target now, or we'll send in the cleanup team." Agent Walsh knew what a cleanup team meant, and the thought of what they might do to an innocent child and her mother made her stomach turn. She looked around at the animals surrounding them, at the local law enforcement officers with their weapons drawn, at the little girl who had somehow brought together natural enemies in perfect harmony. "Control," she said finally. "Mission parameters have changed. The target is not a threat. Recommend we withdraw and reassess." "Agent Walsh," came the cold reply, "you are relieved of command. Cleanup team is inbound. Clear the area immediately." Agent Walsh looked at her team members and saw her own doubts reflected in their faces. They had signed up to protect the country from genuine threats, not to kidnap innocent children. "Team, we're leaving," she announced. "Pack it up." "But the orders," one of her subordinates started to say. "I'm giving you new orders," Agent Walsh cut him off. "We're gone in 2 minutes." As the government agents retreated to their vehicles, Sheriff Bradley kept his weapon trained on them until they were gone. But even after the black SUVs disappeared down the mountain road, he knew this wasn't over. "Hazel," he called to Luna's mother, Pack whatever you need for a few days. You can't stay here. They'll be back with more people and less conscience." Dr. Chen nodded in agreement. "He's right. We need to get you and Luna somewhere safe while we figure out what to do next." But Luna had other ideas. She walked back to the gathered animals and spoke to them in her gentle voice, but this time her words carried a note of sadness. "Friends go home now," she said. "Bad people maybe come back. Luna, keep friends safe." One by one, the animals began to disperse, but not before each one approached Luna for a final gentle touch. The bear cub that had started it all was the last to leave, nuzzling against Luna's cheek before following its parents back into the forest. As they watched the last of the animals disappear into the trees, Hazel felt tears streaming down her face. In the space of an hour, she had seen her daughter command the loyalty of dozens of wild animals, face down armed government agents without fear, and make decisions that showed wisdom far beyond her age. "What's happening to my baby?" she whispered. Dr. Chen put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I think your baby is becoming something the world has never seen before, and there are people who will do anything to control that power." Sheriff Bradley was already on his radio, calling in favors from colleagues in other counties. "We need to move fast," he said. "I know people who can help, but we have to get Luna away from here before the cleanup team arrives." As they prepared to leave the cabin that had been Luna's home for her entire life, none of them noticed the figure watching from the helicopter that was now landing in a clearing half a mile away. Commander Richard Stone stepped out of the aircraft, his cold gray eyes fixed on the distant cabin. He had been monitoring the situation since the first reports of unusual animal behavior, and Agent Walsh's failure to secure the target was just another obstacle to overcome. "Sir," his aide approached with a tablet full of data. "Thermal imaging shows the targets are preparing to leave. Should we intercept?" Commander Stone studied the information for a moment, then shook his head. "Let them run. It will make the eventual capture more dramatic for the media. Start spreading the story that we're hunting a dangerous biological weapon. By the time we're done, the public will be begging us to capture the Martinez child." His aide looked uncomfortable. "Sir, the child appears to be completely harmless. Are we sure this is the right approach?" Commander Stone's expression turned deadly cold. "Soldier, that child can command wildlife with her mind. If she's not controlled, if she's allowed to develop her abilities freely, she could upset the entire balance of power on this planet. Do you want to live in a world where humans are no longer the dominant species?" The aide nodded reluctantly, but privately he wondered if they were making a terrible mistake. From what he had observed, Luna Martinez wasn't trying to dominate anything. She was trying to create harmony. But Commander Stone wasn't interested in harmony. He was interested in control, and anything that threatened human supremacy over the natural world was an enemy to be eliminated. As the cleanup team prepared for their next move, Luna sat in the backseat of Sheriff Bradley's patrol car, looking out at the forest she was leaving behind. Tears rolled down her small cheeks, but she wasn't crying for herself. She was crying because she could sense the fear and confusion of every animal in the valley. They didn't understand why the harmony was being broken, why the bridge between their world and the human world was being threatened. "Don't worry, friends," she whispered too quietly for the adults to hear. "Luna, come back. Luna, fix everything." But even as she made that promise, she could sense something dark approaching. Something that wanted to hurt her and everyone she cared about. For the first time since her abilities had manifested, Luna felt afraid. The real battle for the future of human-animal relations was just beginning. 3 months later, the world had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The story of Luna Martinez had spread across every continent, carried by social media, news outlets, and whispered conversations in every language on Earth. Commander Stone's plan to paint her as a dangerous biological weapon had backfired spectacularly when video footage of Luna peacefully communicating with the animals began circulating online. Dr. Sarah Chen had risked her career to leak the recordings she had made, showing Luna's gentle interactions with the bears and her selfless protection of the cub from the grizzly. The footage of government agents trying to tranquilize a toddler surrounded by protective wildlife had sparked international outrage. But Luna herself had disappeared. Sheriff Bradley had successfully hidden the Martinez family in a network of safe houses operated by people who believed in what Luna represented. They had moved through 7 different states, staying one step ahead of the government teams that hunted them, protected by an underground railroad of sympathizers that grew larger every day, and wherever Luna went, the animals followed. It started small, a few birds here, some stray cats there, but as the weeks passed, the phenomenon grew into something that captured the world's imagination. Entire flocks of migrating birds would change course to pass over whatever town Luna was hiding in. Marine mammals would beach themselves peacefully on nearby shores, only to return to the ocean unharmed after a few days. Scientists around the globe were documenting what they called the Luna effect, a fundamental shift in animal behavior that seemed to radiate outward from wherever the little girl was located. Aggressive species were becoming docile. Traditional predator-prey relationships were being temporarily suspended. Zoo animals were displaying unprecedented levels of calm and contentment. But it was the children who showed the most dramatic changes. Reports began flooding in from every corner of the world. Children, as young as 2, were suddenly demonstrating abilities similar to Luna's, though none as powerful. A 4-year-old in Tokyo could calm her family's anxious dog with a touch. A toddler in Sao Paulo had convinced a flock of parrots to help his grandmother find her lost wedding ring. Twin babies in Stockholm had somehow taught their pet hamster to fetch specific toys by name. The scientific community was in upheaval. Religious leaders debated whether this was divine intervention or something more earthly. Governments struggled to respond to a phenomenon that couldn't be controlled or contained. And in a small cabin hidden deep in the Canadian wilderness, Luna Martinez was growing into something extraordinary. Hazel watched her daughter from the kitchen window as Luna played in the snow with her newest friends. A family of wolves had taken up residence near their current hiding place, along with several deer, a couple of foxes, and the same bear family that had started it all months ago. The animals played together like old friends, with Luna as their gentle coordinator. "She's getting stronger every day," Dr. Chen observed, joining Hazel at the window. The scientist had given up her university position to stay with Luna, documenting her development and protecting her from those who would exploit her abilities. "I know," Hazel replied softly. "Sometimes I watch her, and I see my baby girl. But other times it's like looking at someone much older, much wiser. Yesterday, she told me she could feel the sadness of the big water and asked if we could help the whales." Dr. Chen nodded. "The reports suggest that her range is expanding. Marine biologists are documenting unusual whale behavior patterns across the Pacific. They're singing new songs, forming unprecedented pod alliances. Luna's influence is literally reshaping the natural world." Outside, Luna looked up from her play and waved at them through the window. Her smile was radiant, but Hazel could see something in her daughter's eyes that hadn't been there before. A weight, a responsibility that no 2-year-old should have to carry. That evening, as Hazel tucked Luna into bed, her daughter asked a question that broke her heart. "Mama, why do the bad people want to hurt Luna?" Hazel struggled to find words that a toddler could understand. "Some people are afraid of things that are different, sweetheart. They don't understand that what you can do is beautiful." Luna considered this for a moment, then reached up to touch her mother's face with one small hand. "Luna, make them understand," she said with quiet determination. "Luna, show them that animals and people can be friends." "How, baby?" Luna's eyes sparkled with something that was part mischief, part ancient wisdom. "Luna has idea, big idea." The next morning, Luna's big idea began to unfold. It started with the birds. Every migratory bird in North America suddenly changed course, converging on Washington, D.C. Within hours, the skies above the Capitol were dark, with wings. Flocks of geese, ducks, swans, and songbirds of every description filled the air, but they weren't chaotic or aggressive. They flew in perfect formations, creating intricate patterns against the sky that spelled out a single word in dozens of languages: peace. The marine mammals came next. Whales, dolphins, and seals began appearing in unusual numbers along both coasts. They didn't beach themselves or show distress. Instead, they performed synchronized swimming displays visible from shore, their movements so coordinated and graceful that even hardened military officials found themselves moved to tears. Land mammals followed suit. In every major city around the world, urban wildlife began displaying unprecedented behavior. Pigeons arranged themselves into perfect geometric patterns on government buildings. Stray cats and dogs gathered peacefully in public squares, sitting quietly together despite their natural antagonisms. Even rats and mice emerged from hiding to participate in the strange, beautiful demonstrations. But it was the zoo animals that delivered the most powerful message. In every zoo, aquarium, and wildlife preserve on Earth, the animals began refusing to eat. Not starving themselves, but politely declining food until their human caretakers agreed to post signs explaining Luna's story and the peaceful message she represented. Within days, zoos worldwide had become inadvertent centers of education about the little girl who could speak to animals. The global response was immediate and overwhelming.